software engineering is completely opposite my strengths in my estimation, right? Like, you know, there are things that I know that I'm good at, right? And I wouldn't necessarily count, you know, this space amongst, you know, those things. Like I said, I didn't know what a software engineer was until I was, you know, 23, 24, right? So there are moments where I find myself, you know, writing code, right? Where I get my tests to run. You know, where I'm speaking about things that I didn't know last week.
In this interview, my friend Ibrahim is going to be telling us about how he went from working in the legal department to learning how to code and becoming a software engineer at Google right when COVID started. And I'm sure that you can imagine just how difficult that was for him to make a career switch while at home in a technical field like engineering. So this is going to be a raw and honest take on what it's like for someone to actually learn how to code and come from a non-technical background to start working as a software engineer at Google for their first engineering role. And if you're new here, my name is TJ, and I'm a self-taught software engineer that mentors beginners on their coding journey while sharing stories about my experience working in tech to help you learn more about the industry. So as you're watching this video, make sure you comment down any questions that you have, and I'll get Ibrahim to answer them all. Enjoy the interview. All right, so Ibrahim, can you tell us your name, your role, and where you currently work?
Yeah, my name is Ibrahim Kamara. I'm currently a software engineer at Google.
Oh, that's dope. Where are you from, by the way?
From Philly.
From Philly?
Philly originally.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, dang. Okay. Where's like your parents and stuff from?
Whole family is from Sierra Leone, so that's really where the heart is.
Okay, that's cool. So you are a software engineer at Google?
Yeah, currently, yeah.
So you know that's like the epitome, you know, like the top of the top.
Yeah, that's what they say. You know? That's what they say.
So
yeah.
I guess does it feel like that? Like, does it feel different? Do you feel somehow being a software engineer?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've actually been at Google for just over 5 years now, but only recently transitioned into software engineering over the past year. So, you know, I certainly feel the difference now, right? Being an engineer at Google versus, you know, what I was doing previously at Google. You know, there's certainly clear differences between the two. Yeah.
Like how? Like what?
I mean, you know, more generally, you know, software engineers, you know, considered, you know,
God's saying,
yeah, I mean, you know, that type of thing. You know, certain things are a little bit more available to you, and obviously, just generally, the work that I'm doing is just drastically different from, you know, what I was doing previously. So
I see.
You know.
Wait, so what were you doing before being a software engineer at Google?
Yeah, so my first, you know, 4+ years at Google were spent in an operations role within our wider legal department.
Okay.
You know, so before joining Google, I actually worked at a law firm before coming over to Google, you know, continue kind of legal work in this operations role. And that's where I'd been up until 2021.
Oh, wow.
You know, started 2021 when I transitioned.
So you basically came from a legal background to being a software engineer.
Yeah.
So what like prompted that change or that interest in engineering?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Honestly, I'm still trying to figure it out myself.
Really?
But I mean, for me, going back to, you know, Philly, when I was working at the firm, I knew relatively early on that I didn't want to go to law school anymore.
Okay.
Ultimately, I knew I didn't want to be an attorney, so law school was that.
Why not? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's always important that, like, you know, you get a sense of what the work is before you kind of like venture. So when I went to go work at a firm in Philly, and, you know, to be fair, extremely valuable experience for me in particular. You know, I just got to see the working environment, you know, rub shoulders with attorneys, you know, rub shoulders with their legal assistants and things like that. I just saw very intimately, you know, what the work was, and though it interested me, I knew that work balance, the things that I'll be working on, the problems that I'll be solving, things like that just weren't. It just didn't move. It just didn't move me, right? So I threw kind of law school out the window, and I'm kind of giving you the abridged version. We can go into more depth later, but. When I eventually found my way to Google, I knew my time on the legal team there was going to be temporary.
I see.
I knew I wanted to find my way to doing something more technical. I didn't know what that looked like, but being at Google, right, it's an engineering company, might as well. So, I started laying, the foundation a little bit here and there, also doing my own kind of independent study outside of work, outside of Google, just to kind of see, what could end up sticking.
Yeah.
And then, that was really what, set things in motion.
Okay, interesting. So I guess can you kind of talk more about the process, if you kind of shifting from the legal end of things to then becoming a software engineer there?
Yeah, I mean, again, I did a lot of work, even honestly before I joined Google, to kind of start learning, right? Because before I joined Google, that was, this is around the age of 23, 24.
Wait, hold on. How old are you now?
29.
You don't mind me asking? Okay.
29.
Of course, 24 plus.
It's all good, man. It's all good. Just to be clear. I just turned 29. So, a little bit before I joined Google was when it was the first time I heard this term, software engineer. Right?
Oh wow. Okay.
I'd never heard it before, really, and it's weird because I count myself fortunate because growing up in Philly, I had the opportunity to go to good schools, right, and I consider myself lucky to having gotten a good education pretty much throughout my whole adolescence, but I'd never heard the term software engineer before, so it was interesting. Started doing some independent things, looking at different courses online, just to start flirting with this kind of new field. So once I got to Google, again, I started ramping up a little bit more, taking advantage of all the resources that are, was at my disposal. And then I had the opportunity pretty much towards the end of the first year of the pandemic. So whenever that was 2020, I had an opportunity to do this program that exists internally at Google.
Okay.
That basically, you can think of it like a boot camp within Google that taught us, our cohort, everything about being an engineer at Google. So it wasn't teaching us how to, program or anything like that. Like we weren't learning, the fundamentals of Java or, web development or anything like that. We were learning strictly what it means to develop at Google. So learning, the frameworks, the particular languages and, style guides and, just everything that it meant to, deploy production level kind of like application at, a company at that scale. So, after that was what kind of like gave me, a little bit of the pedigree to then start reaching out to different teams at the company to, see if they would take me on. And, I just, I got fortunate that, I didn't really have to look that hard.
That's good. Dang, that's cool. So you kind of touched on, you guys were just learning the technologies and tools that were specific to Google, right? So does Google have its own technologies that it uses internally that others don't, or what's that about?
No, exactly. Everything at Google is native, which is what makes working at Google can be what makes it so challenging, because you can't use Google really to kind of like go to like Google anything, and particularly for me,
Wait. I'm not sure if they caught that. Basically, what you're saying is, in this role at Google, part of the challenge of being a software engineer at Google is the fact that Google has its own technologies that it uses to build things, and because of that, you can't use Google to Google solutions for issues you run into.
Yeah, not exactly, because again, so much of the frameworks in tech, the tech stack was built at Google for Googlers, right? With them in mind. So, you're not necessarily going to find, all of our
Like
web dev
resources,
frameworks,
yeah.
on Google, right? Which, for me, being so new to the space, definitely added to the complexity. Aside from the fact that I just still had so much to build up, like so much foundation to build up on my own. I had to get used to all of these frameworks that didn't exactly have a complement like outside of kind of like the Google ecosystem, right? That isn't a difficulty that I only kind of experience, right? Seasoned engineers, working at other places, come to Google, and it's almost.
I'm not the only one.
I'm not the only one. Seasoned engineers can, they come in, and it's almost like they're starting from ground zero, right? A little bit.
So basically, what you're saying is, if I was to get a job at Google as an engineer, that it would essentially be me starting from point. Is it point A or point A plus?
I mean, you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying all that, but like I am saying that. Exactly. I'm saying it's the learning curve is certainly steep at Google right now. There are a lot of resources there that just as with anything, with time, you can get a little bit more acclimated, and again, you're not the only one, right? So. That was the another advantage that I had, just kind of like being in a space where there were so many resources.
Well, I mean, so in terms of like resources, what type of resources are you talking about? Do they pair you with like a senior engineer or like a mentor? Is there documentation? Like what type of resources?
I mean, all the above, really.
Okay.
But for me, the biggest thing about working at Google, like the biggest advantage has always been the people and kind of like the caliber of person that I kind of like have access to now. So
that's cool.
It's just nice, particularly now that we're going back into the office a little bit more. It's nice to be able to leverage some of these people, like some of my teammates, right? I can actually turn to my left and like ask questions, because again, I really started at least this part of the journey during the pandemic, where it was just me. It was just me, in the crib, just trying to figure laptop on my four walls, just trying to figure out how to build, right?
Yeah. So like that is something that people don't talk about a lot. I've mentioned to my students a few times, because a big part of wanting to get into tech is being able to work remote.
Right.
And a lot of people that are just starting this engineering journey are so eager to just be remote. And in my head, I'm just like, there's pros and cons that you really want to weigh there. Because if you're a beginner, there's definitely a big pro in terms of being in the office, because it just makes it easier to like you were saying, to just turn to the side and just ask questions, right?
Man, I mean, and like for so many people, it just like within the space, like going fully remote post-pandemic, right, looked like such an enticing thing for them, right? Me, I was ready to go back to the office, day one, really, and especially, once I transitioned onto my team, right, like, I can't. It's just kind of difficult to put into words, just kind of how difficult it was trying to figure out a lot. When I just didn't have teammates, left and right. I didn't have all of my tools, right? Engineers tend to have more elaborate setups for work. Didn't really have any of that, at least initially. So, it made the complex even more complicated. So
how did you navigate that? Like when you were starting this program or this journey, or just working as an engineer at Google, and you were at home and remote, how did you navigate those challenges? Like, how did you go about addressing that with what you had? So you did it.
I mean, I did it. Yeah. I mean, listen, I did what I could, the best that I could, right? So, emails, pinging, teammates when, I could. I mean, to be honest, some of the biggest resources I had were some of my, friends, close friends outside of Google, yourself included, right? Individuals who I could reach out to. just to ask, from complicated to the most basic questions, right? I really just tried to take advantage of everything that I could, right? Considering that, I wasn't in office, I wasn't around my teammates, people aren't always the most responsive,
Yep.
Via email and things like that, right?
Yeah. Wait, so I guess like knowing what you know now, how do you think that you could have better prepared for this transition?
Oh, study computer science in undergrad. Like,
okay.
That
pure computer science. Because I guess at Google you're creating technology.
Yeah, but I'm being a little facetious when I say that. I mean, it's just being able to kind of speak the language, right? Like from the beginning, even if you're unfamiliar with the technology, right? Like, because right? A lot of what you did was self-teaching as well, right?
Yeah.
Like I was there with you while you were, coming out of your boot camp and trying to figure things out, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like so much of engineering is really just rules, right? A lot of it is already codified, it's written down, right?
Yeah.
Like, Java, JavaScript, whatever the language it may be, you can learn these things in relatively short order because, the rules are all there. But if you don't already have kind of like, I don't know, that muscle in your brain, you know what I'm saying, to like understand like what an object is, what a class is, right? It just makes everything so much more difficult, When I was starting, I was describing the whole experience like trying to learn calculus when you don't know numbers yet. Right?
Okay. So I will say, I think that is where the importance of having a mentor is, because like I see this issue a lot with a lot of students that start my program. Like they have completely no background in programming at all whatsoever,
Right.
and they're just kind of like spinning like their wheels until we have a mentor session where I'm able to just kind of talk it in their language. Right. So for me, like I feel like mentorship just kind of really helps to alleviate that a bit. I mean, it doesn't fully address everything, but it like definitely helps to navigate that like a lot. So, but
I mean, it does, man. Just having people that you can just ask questions of, you know what I'm saying? In a, less stressful environment than, maybe your work, right? It goes a long way. And like I said, I definitely value the friends of mine who, again, yourself included, our boy Yusuf as well. I count him amongst, people, Lou, just people who I could on a random evening just, text, ask a question about X, Y, and Z, and at least be pointed in the right direction, right? Things like that definitely pay dividends.
Okay, well, so here let's kind of pivot a bit. So, what like would you say has been the best part of this whole experience and journey?
I mean, the best part. I mean, for me, it's just doing something new, right?
Come on, okay, all right.
No, and I'm being serious. Like, this is as new kind of gets for me. Like, this is. Software engineering is completely opposite my strengths, in my estimation, right? Like, there are things that I know that I'm good at, right? And I wouldn't necessarily count, this space amongst, those things. Like I said, I didn't know what a software engineer was until I was, 23, 24, right? So there are moments where I find myself, writing code, right? Where I get my tests to run. Where I'm speaking about things that I didn't know last week, and it's cool, it's interesting. I'm having different conversations. I'm rubbing shoulders with different types of people. I'm starting to think about how I can apply these new skills that I'm learning to the things that matter to me.
I see.
And like, seeing that materialize has been the dopest part, I think.
Do you think that there is a benefit to being a software engineer outside of what you do at work? Do you see the way that does it impact you, how you think, how you navigate the world, etc.? I
mean, honestly, bro, like when we talk about, what was the impetus, right? Like that is a big part of it. When I think about, really what motivated me to become a software engineer, right? It was the thought that I could start to build this new muscle that would allow me to problem solve, right? Because you know, you hear people talk about they like solving problems, right? Like, you know, back in the day, I used to think that was the most, like, just the weirdest thing to kind of like say, you know what I'm saying? I like to be a problem solver. Like, I don't know what that means, right? But like, I get it now. Cause like, you know, and you'll see it too. I'm sure, you know, you've grown a little bit more comfortable addressing problems in like a different type of way than you would have, you know, previously, right? And like, that is really a lot of what it is about for me.
I mean, I think that's what engineering is in general. Like, you are a researcher and problem solver, and the technologies and tools, and the technologies are just the tools you use to put your solution.
Right.
That's it.
Right. And that's why, you know, that's why, particularly when we talk about like interviewing at Google, right? Which fortunately I didn't have to go through in my, you know, in the process that I went through, right? I navigated my way around the interviews because I wasn't going to do that. When we talk about interviewing at Google, Google is less interested in like the actual technologies that you know, or, you know, whatever necessarily that you've built in the past or anything like that, or the fact that you're not going to know anything about Google frameworks and technologies, because like I said, everything is native, right? Yeah. They don't expect you to know these things. They just want to know that you can problem solve. They just want to see how you address, you know, a problem that's put in front of you. Even if you don't necessarily get to the answer or get to the right answer in, you know, the allotted time or whatever, they just want to kind of see how you think, right? And
thought process.
You know, that is exactly how you said it, you know. Problem solving is the skill.
Yeah. If you are not interested in solving problems as a job, then engineering is probably not for you, because that is what you get paid to do, and that's where. Well, I guess so. I kind of actually do want to ask you about imposter syndrome a bit later, but I know at times that's where that like happens, where you run into a problem that you can't immediately figure out. And you start feeling self-aware, self-conscious, and just kind of like doubting yourself, etc. But yeah, so how do you deal with imposter syndrome, or have you dealt with imposter syndrome, and how did you navigate that if you did?
You know, it's a good question. I'll be real.
You've never dealt with it.
Personally, I don't think I have, right? And I'll tell you this, right? Because I've always been very aware of what it is that I'm trying to do here. Like, I'm really trying to jump a flight of stairs, right? You know, and like, I get that, right? So I don't put any burden on myself to like figure this stuff out from the beginning, because like, I know I didn't study this. Again, I only recently learned what a software engineer was. I am at Google, like the engineering company, right, with all of its native technologies, and it's a very difficult place to be cutting your teeth, to like be getting started. So like, I get all of that. I think a lot of the imposter syndrome stuff comes often from, you know, just internally the pressure that we often put on ourselves, you know, to get this thing right now. This isn't the space for that, really, right? And like, the fortune I have, again, just being at a place like Google, where like I feel like maybe counterintuitively I can breathe a little bit.
That's good.
You know, I can breathe a little bit more, because, you know, I'd be shooting myself in the foot if every time, and it happens a lot, every time my code doesn't run. Like, if every time my code doesn't run, every time my tests don't build.
Hey,
you know, like,
hopefully Ibrahim's manager is not watching this. My code hard.
You know what I'm saying? Like, at least not, you know, the first 10 times, right? Or, you know, whatever it may be, right? You know, I would be doing myself a disservice if every time things just didn't go the right way, that I'll be doubting myself. Yeah, questioning whether or not I'm on the right path, questioning whether or not I'm capable of doing these things, right? And my thing with like humility, right? You know, it sometimes has a negative connotation, where like, you know, if you're humble, you know, it may look like you're denying your strengths or whatever, but like I kind of look at it as as a means of you just being honest about your weaknesses and what you're not good at. If you're honest about that, then you're in a good place to, overcome whatever, it is you're trying to overcome. And I think that's a good place to start. So, I mean, yeah, thankfully, I haven't spent too much time doubting whether or not I can do this. I question whether or not I could be good at it long term, of course, but I don't have the answer to that, and I'm curious at finding out, and that's a lot of the reason why I'm doing this.
That's a wait. What you're like? That you don't know if you'll be good at this long term. Why would you put that on there in terms of good at this long term? What do you think could change that you suddenly? Because wouldn't you imagine that over time that you get better?
Of course. Okay.
And
that
that's why I was kind of confused.
I mean, listen, that's the expectation, right? And like that's the hope too. But I'm sure if you were asked like what your strengths are, right? You'd be able to list at least a couple of them, right? And like it might make sense even if we even think of like a college student trying to figure out what they want to study or whatever. Sometimes it's helpful to start with those things that like you get at least at the beginning, right? Because like those things that you're good at, that you might be uniquely capable at doing, like those are the things often that we see people excel at, right? So for me, coming back to the software engineering, it's still very early. So like I don't have all these answers yet. I am curious to see if this is something that like I can carve out a bit of a a niche for myself in.
You will. I do want to say one last thing about imposter syndrome that is kind of aligned with what you're saying. Anytime that I get into a situation where I feel that kind of coming, I remind myself that even though I don't know this thing, my favorite word to add is yet.
Yet.
I don't know this thing yet. And I get paid to figure this stuff out.
Right.
But not to figure it out on my own. I have teammates, right? So for me, like I have no qualms asking for help. But the one thing that all engineers want of you to do before you come ask them for help is for you to try to at least figure it out on your own first. So yeah, like I tell people, like imposter syndrome is a distraction that's trying to keep you from doing what you need to do to solve the problem, which is to learn or ask questions. That's it. Like those are the only two ways that you're going to be able to solve any kind of challenge that you're facing. Like either look up some more resources or ask for help. That's it. So anytime you start dealing with imposter syndrome, that's because you're ignoring those two solutions. Right. So that's it. My bad.
No, I mean, I think what you're highlighting is true, and really what you're describing, I think sounds to me is like you treat yourself with a little bit more grace, right? Like you don't know this thing. It's okay that you don't know, and it's okay that you need to ask for help, right? You may or may not believe it, but this has actually been one of the coolest things that I've seen, like at Google in particular, because you might think from the outside looking in that all the engineers at Google, every single person there knows exactly what they're talking about like a beast, all day. You know what I'm saying? No. Individuals know what they know, and often, at least ideally, know what they don't know. And then just know when they need to ask for help. Know when they need to ask somebody else about this thing. And that's probably a skill in and of itself, right? Knowing when to ask for help, how to ask for help. Engineers, they got their own, way of communicating, their own language and things like that. But sometimes it helps just to be a little bit nicer to yourself and, just be like, it's okay that I don't know this thing right now. Right.
Something that helped me was when I started working in tech, I quickly realized that a lot of people don't know what they're doing.
They don't.
Like even all the way to the very top, like a lot of people are just still trying to figure stuff out. And just because someone has a certain title doesn't mean that they know everything. A lot of people are still trying to figure stuff out. And, that's it. Like everyone doesn't know everything yet. And people are just like you. They are still learning, still growing, and they still have people, they ask questions too. You know, so definitely don't feel like you're the only one that has questions or that gets stuck. Like that is a everyday, every person thing.
Man, and it's, man, and you know, being honest, it's easier said than done, right? Like, because like at the end of the day, you know, you can tell somebody, hey, everyone here is just figuring it out too, right? That may or may not.
That's true.
Make you feel, you know, better, but it is the reality, and it is something that you have to come to terms with. People like you are also trying to figure this thing out. The difference is maybe these people are a little bit more comfortable asking for help when they need it, and being honest about the fact that they don't know this thing yet. Like you said.
That's fair. So you kind of touched on a slight subject. How important would you say mindset is in terms of this journey? Like, do you think mindset is important, valuable, or do you think that one should just kind of focus on just building skills?
Bro, it's everything, man. It's it's everything.
People like hear that, but what does that mean, right? Because I know, you know, probably like y'all, I've heard mindset is everything, but what like does that mean?
Okay. It was everything for me. Again, considering just right. Let's not speak in the past tense. It certainly is everything. But like just for me in particular, going through this beginning, you know, during the pandemic. Again, it's really it's just me in a room, really trying to figure out all of this from scratch. The program that I did at Google was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life until I started as a software engineer, and then that promptly became the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life.
Wow.
Easy, like without question. Again, I'm doing a lot of this on my own. I'm only recently going back into the office where I can, you know, start to work around my teammates, you know, ask questions in real time, you know, things like that. Before it was just, you know, me and my four walls. So much of this is everything. Everything is brand new. Yeah. Everything I'm learning for the first time. I'm seeing for the first time. Again, working with Google's native technologies, I can't actually use Google to like Google everything. I have to rely on internal resources that are often built for other people who are already working in this space, and you know, things like that. With so much newness, right? Like it'd be very easy to say, all right, yeah, this ain't it, right? That wasn't my mindset. My mindset, like you kind of described, I don't know this thing yet, right? It really is a question of time, and I see something valuable here. There's something worth all of this striving, you know, all of this banging my head against the wall, right? Okay. You know, that was how I was thinking my way through, you know, all of this all of this complexity.
That's good. Yeah, man. I mean, so if you got through that in terms of getting through the Google Software Engineering Bootcamp during the pandemic, remotely with little to no resources, you can pretty much get through anything else at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
what?
It certainly feels like that now. Like, you know, nothing really scares me.
That's good.
You know, and you know, even before it, right? Like, I kind of saw this coming, right? I had an idea of, I at least had a sense that this would be difficult, right? I didn't know how difficult for sure, because it's impossible to know, but I knew this was going to be difficult. But again, you know, I'm kind of defiant in that way. It's like, why not, right?
That's true, yeah.
It's like, why not?
Okay, that's like good. Well, here, so let's kind of switch pace a bit. What are some misconceptions that you had about what being a software engineer meant, that now that you are one, that you know that, oh, okay, that was false. Like, that's not real.
Well, I mean, again, it's still early for me, but, you know, a lot of my time isn't actually spent coding.
Oh, really? What's your time spent doing?
I mean, again, you know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, just trying to figure out how these tests run. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, what all these servers are and binaries, and you know, just again, I'm working with production level code, right? Just
so you basically spend more time trying to understand what's in front of you.
Understand the framework. You know, understand this new tool that we're trying to, onboard onto this team, right? Obviously reading a lot of documentation and things like that. And, even when I'm coding, right? Obviously, once I write whatever I write, why isn't this thing working?
Yep.
Right. So now I got to figure out, okay, what are the tests actually doing? What are my assumptions? Right. Like what am I assuming about this code that I'm writing? Right. Because often that's the reason why, it's not working. Right. Yeah. I mean, particularly in my early days, man, like, I don't know, those first 4 or 5 months, I can probably count on two hands, really, the number of like CLs or number of code changes that I actually submitted, because a lot of your time is spent outside. So that was definitely something that was interesting to see, man. Like writing design docs, right, for like things that you're trying to build, right?
Oh yeah. So how important would you say that writing skills are to being an engineer?
I mean, really, like just communication skills, just generally, it's extremely important. And another thing that's been interesting to see, right, that really competent, strong engineers don't necessarily make the best communicators, don't necessarily make the best teachers, right? Like,
it's tough. That like it's tough. I think that's why they need more people like us in this field, like people that don't have the traditional engineering background.
Right. So, individuals with those soft skills, right, who are able to, break a problem down into its component parts and like make it plain. Just speak very plainly about very complex topics, things like that. Yeah, it's extremely important, man.
Yep. Yeah, and again, to me, that is why it is important to pretty much have mentors that not just look like you, but have sort of the same backgrounds and experiences that you do, because it makes it easier for them to relay information, to break down complex topics into things that you understand, because they can speak your language.
Indeed.
Okay. So yeah, can you kind of walk us through a typical day in the life of a software engineer at Google? That's like a popular video on YouTube. So
I mean, I'll do my best. Certainly, my day generally consists of, at least at the start, just getting a sense of what my to-dos are for the day, and right, that generally comes from our sprint planning that happens.
What is that? What is a sprint planning? Yeah.
I mean,
what is a sprint? What is sprint planning?
Yeah, I'm certainly gonna mess some of this up, right? Because this is
a general idea.
There's certainly the space for like program managers and who kind of like organize the teams and their goals, but basically work is often organized in chunks, right? And those chunks will be broken up over a certain time period, right? Be it 2 weeks or like a month or whatever, right? Like for us, we work in 2-week sprints.
Okay.
Right. So
that's a sprint.
Right. Okay. So like over the course of 2 weeks, at the beginning of the sprint, you should have a sense of, okay, this is where I'm going to spend my time, kind of over this period, right? I may not get to all of it, but like this is what I expect my time will be. Devoted to.
Okay.
Right. So on any given day within a sprint, you at least have an idea of like what your tasks could be, right? You could end up focusing on any number of different things, but depending on priorities and what goals are over maybe like a quarter, or maybe even just like a couple of months, you'll be able to prioritize kind of, okay, maybe I need to spend some more time on this thing, right? If it's a particular bug that I need to fix, or
wait, interesting. So typically all of that is already taken care of in like the typical sprint planning meetings, where they kind of like pick out, okay, these are all the tickets, features and stuff we're going to work on. This is the priority of those. So are you saying that, I guess that responsibility is more so kind of on you, or?
No, I mean, there's still enough responsibility on you to decide on any given day,
Okay.
right? Like, okay, what should I be focusing on? Because, you know, the sprint planning is about, you know, just big picture, what our priorities are,
Yeah.
right? Over the sprint, over a month, over a quarter, whatever, right? But on any given day, you might decide, okay, I'm going to focus on this thing because I know I can knock it out today. And maybe the rest of the week, I can focus on more of our longer term goals. So what is nice, right? Like for me, in any type of working environment, I don't like micromanagement, right? Like
Yeah.
I like to just kind of be left to my own devices, right? To decide, you know, how I'm gonna work. So this type of environment does lend itself to me a little bit more because, you know, you just have a little bit more agency to figure out, you know, day to day what I'm gonna work on, which is nice. And nobody's necessarily, you know, breathing over your shoulder until the end of sprint, right?
Hey.
And then, you know, questions will be asked.
We do 6-week sprints. At the
Oh yeah.
time.
Oh, word? Okay. So I mean, some of your projects might be a little bit like, I guess, bigger, longer term.
Yeah. But to basically what you're saying, the pressure isn't necessarily there.
At least not up front. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Now,
right. Unless I'm procrastinating.
you know what I'm saying? If you're procrastinating, all right, you know, week 5, you know, what are we talking about?
That's true.
But, you know, so, you know, generally that's the, you know, the idea of, you know, of a sprint. So, you know, I come in, you know, on a Monday morning, right? I have an idea of, you know, kind of what my tasks are more broadly, like for the week. So, you know, I'll start, at least I try, you know, for that day to just start to break down my tasks into, you know, even smaller component parts, right? You know, if it's, you know, research that I need to do, or if I need to reach out to this team because they own the tool that I'm trying to, you know, leverage here. So, you know, they can start to answer questions for me. You know, maybe I haven't actually written any code in a while and I just want to, you know, find some bugs in our existing code base and just, you know, push out some, you know, relatively small changes, you know, just to keep my, you know, self fresh or whatever.
I think that's called having a quick win.
Yeah,
or something.
all right. So, you know, you just told me something, right? You literally just told me something. Yeah, that's a, you know,
that's good.
Because you know, I definitely do that sometimes. Because like I said, not all my time is spent coding, right? Sometimes you need to keep that muscle up.
Yeah, that's good. Well, okay, here. So, can we? Yeah, man, let's talk money. So can you kind of walk us through, because I think Google breaks engineers into different bands, like 1, 2, 3, like, or is it bands or levels? Or
levels. It's kind of how it's described.
Yeah. So can you kind of talk to us about the different pay expectations for those levels?
Yeah. You know, keeping in mind that I'm still kind of new to this myself, so, you know, still trying to figure all that out. But so I'm currently what is called a software engineer level 2,
Okay.
or software engineer 2, right? That is actually the base level engineer, like at Google.
Oh, there's no one.
So one, and I actually one of my mentors who recently left Google to go to Netflix, I think like last year, he actually broke this down to me this week. The software engineer ones are our interns. Our interns, or I think our high school interns and or like our college interns.
That's
right?
crazy.
Like something along those lines. So like the expectation is, you know, if you've gone through an internship at Google with that, you know, title, if they ask you to come back, then you become a software engineer too. Right, and that is kind of, you know, the base entry level, you know, engineer who's coming in, and then once you reach, and like those is going to get even more confusing now. So software engineer 2 is actually you know, a level 3 Googler, right? So like the title is software engineer 2. But you are a level 3, right? And, you know, you can go up to level 4, 5, 6, 7, right? You can be a level 4, 5, 6, whatever, as, you know, a software engineer 2, but the expectation is, you know, as you go up in level, your responsibilities are obviously going to increase, right? Your expectations are going to increase. So, you know, as you get promoted, your title is going to change. and everything that comes with that, right? And at Google, your pay, compensation, salary, and all those things are like very closely tied to your level and title, and what's considered what's called the ladder that you're on, which is like the employment job family that you're in, right? So where I used to be on what was called a legal operation, on the legal operations ladder or policy specialist ladder, I'm now on the software engineering ladder, right? So with that transition, came the salary adjustments, compensation adjustments, things like that.
Okay. What, like, apart from pay, what are some of the other benefits, or like what makes up part of that compensation package for Google engineers?
Engineers specifically, or just Googlers?
Well, I mean, really just, well, both. Starting with engineering. I will say one thing I enjoyed about Google was the cafeteria.
Indeed, right. We can talk about that. Yeah, software engineers are, generally paid, well, particularly, your compensation considers your salary as well as bonus, as well as your equity, right?
Okay. And equity. Okay.
Right. So all of those things get adjusted, once you become a software engineer, and will increasingly get adjusted as you get promoted, move into, a new level, job title, things like that. And, compared to what I was doing before, this has been a considerable, salary compensation adjustment, which, certainly I appreciate it. But, more broadly, Googlers have, are similarly, their compensation considers salary, bonus, equity, all of those things. And, we got, I can't keep track of all the, perks and things like that. Retirement, 401k, health benefits, things like that.
Okay. Well, here, so I guess, have you been kind of thinking about the future, right? Like, where do you see yourself? Well, I know earlier you kind of mentioned like your goal for the next 5 years. In the next 10 years, right? Where do you see yourself?
Man, I don't know.
CEO of
Google. Of Google. Shoot for the stars,
know, right?
Shoot for the stars. Yeah, that's not really my path. To be honest, I joined Google in 2017. I always had a sense that I wouldn't be at Google for 15 years or anything like that, right? For me, Google has been an incredible place to learn, right? But eventually I got to use that learning for something. Like very, very, very specific. And, much like with the transition to engineering or transition into like an actual technical role, I didn't exactly know what that looked like, at the beginning. So similarly, I'm learning all these skills now. Obviously, I've got a big network now of individuals. I don't exactly know what I'm going to be applying this stuff to, but I know, and I want it to be something, back home in Sierra Leone, as well as, Philly. That's kind of the long-term vision, but that's as much as I know right now.
That's good. Well, dude, it's been incredible to just watch your journey, because I've been knowing Ibrahim for a long time, like a very long time before becoming a software engineer. So it was just amazing watching that transition. I think, yeah, dude, because I was like telling you even before you started the program, I was like, I think that you would enjoy engineering, or that engineering is something for you, because you get to really flex that muscle of just really like trying to problem solve and think a lot, which to me I think would be very beneficial for the things that you want to do, like outside of engineering in general.
Right.
So yeah, man, I think that your story is very like amazing, inspirational. So I'm glad that you were able to come here and actually share with us.
I appreciate it, man, and I definitely learned a lot from watching your hustle too. I don't even think I'd ever heard of the term boot camp before.
Oh, really?
Kind of like you went through yours, and it was helpful to have that exposure.
Yeah.
Kind of looking in for sure. So I appreciate you saying that.
No problem. For people that are interested in becoming software engineers, or maybe even working at Google, or just making this career switch into tech, what do you have any advice, any tips, or just?
Yeah, I mean, my experience is certainly going to be a little unique because, I was already at Google, right, before I transitioned, right? So obviously that made that a lot easier. Interviewing directly wasn't gonna work for me because that in and of itself is like that's a skill. That's a skill by itself. Just interviewing. Right.
Dude, I remember one time I called Ibrahim because I had an interview at Google, and I was telling, look, man.
Yeah.
I told him straight up, I'm not doing this interview. I was like, I'm not gonna be able to spend the time, because on average, I think minimum, a lot of people spend like 3 months just prepping.
At a minimum.
Yeah, at a minimum. Yeah. Just prepping for a Google interview. I'm like, I'm good, So
right.
Yeah, that's.
It wasn't. For me, looking back, it wasn't worth my time. This was the path that made sense for me. So, just even kind of like starting there, it's important for you to be like aware of like what your skills are and what your strengths are.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe you're already working at a place that has like a lot of resources where you can kind of like start to learn gradually. Right. Like, don't necessarily feel like, if you want to be a software engineer, you need to leave the company that you're at right now. Right. Obviously not everywhere is Google, but if you can start to like either shadow, lean on folks. Like, if you even have access to engineers, right? Like, if you work in a place where like engineers are building, the tools that you're selling or whatever. If you even have access to engineers, just start talking to these individuals, seeing what it looks like, right? Just look at some computer code, right?
So it's very important that it's actually crazy you brought that up. That's how I became an engineer.
That was how
I was playing ping pong with one of the engineers at my job. I was working as a business analyst. I was playing ping pong, and I had hit the ball like past his desk. So I just walked past his desk, and I looked at his screen, and I saw some code. I think it was just like some basic SQL statements or something.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that's it. I can do that.
You can do that, right? And listen,
I can do that.
Listen, you laugh. But like that's really what it is. Like,
that's all it took that day.
We took. Listen, and I know you well, right? Like, just being a confident person, like, it helps, right? Just having exposure sometimes, like that's all it is. Just having exposure, either somebody who can just explain these things to you, somebody who just shows you what is behind your webpage. Right? Like, that's all it is. And like, if you can start to learn how to communicate these things, or somebody can communicate these things to you, you can have that same type of experience where it's like, oh, I get that. Maybe there's something here.
No, that's it, dude. I see that so often with the students in my program who they like come in with no background at all. And then just after the first few weeks, they've built a couple websites.
Right.
So now it's like, you see how like, when you don't know something, it seems super hard. But when you really start to kind of peel back the layers and you start learning it, it starts to make sense to you.
Yeah, man. And we have a tendency to put software engineers certainly on a pedestal, and like this whole space where just it makes it seem like it's off limits.
Nah, it's right there.
It doesn't have to be, right?
Yeah.
Particularly with all the tech that we have at our disposal every day, right?
Yeah.
You can learn what's
Oh yeah. Instead of just being a consumer all the time, you can actually create technology instead of just playing on it and using it all the time.
Indeed, man. Indeed.
Anyways, thank you, man. It was good. Appreciate you. Appreciate that, bro.
Anytime, bro.
So,
anytime.
All right. Enjoy.